Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into something pretty significant that's happening, well, right now, actually. A major prisoner exchange between Ukraine and Russia. We're working from a recent news report.
That's right.
And our mission, really, is to unpack the details, understand how this swap connects to some recent diplomatic moves, and kind of see where it fits in the bigger picture of exchanges during this conflict.
Trying to get beyond just the headline.
Exactly. What does it mean for you listening?
Yeah.
So, okay, let's unpack this. What does this recent news tell us?
Well, the main thing is there's a large-scale swap of detainees underway between Kiev and Moscow.
Okay.
The report we have indicates it kicked off today, Friday, May 23rd. So it's happening as we speak, essentially.
And it's not small scale, right? We're talking hundreds of prisoners on both sides.
That's the report, yes.
Yeah.
Hundreds being exchanged. Pretty substantial numbers.
And the source pointed out something I found interesting anyway. Usually these things aren't announced until they're done, right? But this time the report mentions U.S. President Donald Trump actually announced it on social media while it was still unfolding.
Yeah, that is a departure. Definitely a change from the usual, let's say, protocol for these kinds of operations.
Seems notable.
It certainly is. And, this particular exchange, the agreement for it, 1,000 prisoners from each side that wasn't just decided today.
Right, it came from somewhere.
Exactly. According to the source, the actual agreement was hammered out at that meeting in Istanbul just last week. May 16th, the report mentions.
Ah, yes, Istanbul. I remember reading that. The report said that was the first time the two sides had actually met face-to-face since pretty early on, after the full-scale invasion in Feb 2022.
That's correct. A long gap.
Yeah.
And the context for that meeting is quite revealing, according to the source material.
How so?
Well, the report states that Russian President Putin was the one who initially proposed the meeting. And the timing suggests, or at least the source suggests, it seemed to be a response to that ultimatum from Kyiv's European allies, the ceasefire or sanctions one.
Right. I remember that.
So the perspective offered in the source is that many observers saw Putin's proposal as, well, perhaps a tactic, an attempt by the Kremlin to distract or maybe just delay things.
Interesting diplomatic chess playing there.
It really is. Looking at the maneuvers around these events, like the source does, it gives you a lot to think about.
So this Istanbul meeting, it got a lot of attention, seemed like a big deal beforehand. What does the source say actually came out of it? What was the concrete result?
Well, this is where it gets perhaps a little less dramatic than the buildup. The report is very clear on this.
Okay.
It states the only significant outcome from that Istanbul meeting was this agreement, the prisoner exchange agreement. 1,000 prisoners per side.
Wow. Okay, so the only significant outcome.
That's what the source says.
I mean, obviously, getting hundreds of people home is huge for their families. Absolutely huge. But the source uses the word underwhelming, doesn't it?
It does.
Describing that outcome as underwhelming, when you see it as the only tangible result from what was apparently a highly touted meeting, that contrast between expectation and reality, highlighted by the source, is really key here, I think.
That assessment definitely puts the Istanbul meeting in perspective. But to really get the full picture, we need to zoom out a bit.
Okay.
This swap today, it's not happening in a vacuum. It's not like these exchanges only happen after big meetings.
Right.
The report emphasizes that prisoner swaps have actually been a pretty regular occurrence throughout the conflict. They're kind of a consistent thread, even when other talks go nowhere.
That's a really important point. A constant, even amidst the fighting and stalled diplomacy. How regular are we talking, according to the report?
The source gives us some helpful numbers. There was another swap, for example, just earlier this month, May 7th.
Okay, pretty recent.
Yeah. And in that one, the report says more than 200 Ukrainian service members were returned.
Wow.
And to give even more context, the source cites Ukraine's coordination headquarters for the treatment of prisoners of war.
Right.
They stated that the May 7th swap was actually the 5th one just this year. And get this, the 64th swap overall since the start of the full-scale invasion.
64 since March 2022, I think the source mentioned for the start date.
Correct. March 2022 is the reference point. And as of that May 7th swap, again, according to the Ukrainian source cited, the total number of Ukrainian citizens released since then was 4,757.
Almost 5,000 people. That really underlines the point about this being an ongoing process.
Absolutely. It's a consistent feature.
So these prisoner swaps, they represent this specific, maybe limited channel of agreement that just keeps happening, which really contrasts with maybe the bigger goals people hope for from direct talks, doesn't it?
It does.
What does the source say about what didn't get achieved back in Istanbul, besides the swap agreement?
Right. The source makes sure to point that out, too. It explicitly notes other major items that were discussed or demanded, but, well, didn't materialize.
Like what?
For instance, a big one. Ukraine and its allies were pushing hard for an immediate, unconditional ceasefire. The report confirms that didn't happen. No ceasefire agreement came out of Istanbul.
Oh, okay. Anything else?
The source also mentions Kiev put forward the idea of direct talks between President Zelensky and President Putin.
Leader-to-leader talk.
Exactly. And the report clearly implies this wasn't a significant outcome either. That didn't happen as a result of the meeting.
Okay, so let's try and pull this together. We've got this major prisoner swap happening right now. It's directly linked to that agreement made in Istanbul last week.
Correct.
But the source kind of frames that Istanbul meeting as maybe disappointing, highly touted, but its main result was just this exchange, which the report calls underwhelming compared to bigger goals.
That's the assessment presented, yes.
Yeah. And this exchange itself, it's part of this much larger ongoing pattern of swaps throughout the war, happening even when things like ceasefire talks or leader meetings don't pan out.
That pattern really is significant, I think. Because, yes, compared to a ceasefire or some kind of peace framework, these swaps are limited. Very limited in scope.
Right.
But what the report shows us is that they represent this narrow yet surprisingly persistent channel. It's a space where the two sides can actually reach tangible, limited agreements. Even
when everything else seems deadlocked.
Exactly. It shows that even when the big diplomatic efforts seem to stall or produce very little, this specific avenue for, negotiation and actual results remains open, at least for now.
So here's something to think about, a final thought for you, listening, drawn straight from the facts in our source today. The report painted the Istanbul meeting's outcome as underwhelming on the big issues, no peace, no ceasefire. Yet, this very specific, concrete agreement to release 1,000 prisoners on each side was achieved there.
A tangible result.
Right. So what does the fact that this specific thing could be agreed upon, even against that backdrop of zero progress on the major fronts, what does that tell you about the sort of underlying nature of how these two sides are still interacting, even now?